And now to a debate between third-party presidential candidates, including independent Ralph Nader, Chuck Baldwin of the Constitution Party, and Libertarian Bob Barr. The moderator of the debate is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges. It's just over an hour.
Well, welcome to this very important debate by the City Club of Cleveland with two and perhaps even maybe later three of the third-party candidates for President of the United States. I'm Ralph Delarada, and I have the pleasure to serve as the President of the City Club this year. The City Club has a long and proud history of hosting debates for public office. Whether the races are perceived by pollsters to be close or whether pundits consider it high profile, the City Club of Cleveland provides an opportunity for those interested in their government to learn more about the issues and the candidates as well. And, as is our strong tradition, we often provide an opportunity for those who sometimes do not receive the visibility they richly deserve. Also here at the City Club, we go face-to-face, in person and in depth. And yes, you, the audience, and voters will get to ask questions. Many thanks to those of you who are here and those watching on C-SPAN, listening to 90.3, or watching and listening to our webcasts or podcasts. You can link to those podcasts through our website, www.cityclub.org. Television broadcasts are supported by National City and Cleveland State University, and our radio broadcast sponsored by Case Western Reserve University, and our webcast provided by the University of Akron. 60 minutes will go by very quickly. So let's proceed. We are delighted to have as our moderator for today's debate, Dan Moulthrop. Dan is the founding host of The Sound of Ideas, which airs weekdays mornings on IdeaStream 90.3. He holds a master's in journalism from the University of California, Berkeley. Dan, it's yours now.
Thank you very much, Ralph. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon, whether you're here at the City Club or listening to us live on WCPN or watching later on the weekend on C-SPAN. It's great to have you all here. It's a real pleasure to moderate this debate and actually quite an honor. And it's important to note, too, that today actually marks the 96th anniversary of the City Club. And it was 96 years ago on October 30th in 1912 that the City Club held its first forum with Mayor Newton Baker, among others, who spoke. And since that time, this forum, this place, the City Club of Cleveland, has had a long tradition of being a bastion of free speech. And as it is today, continuing in that tradition with at least two and possibly three of the third-party candidates for the President of the United States. So let me describe the format of the debate if I could. We'll hear from each of the candidates first for a 3-minute opening statement and then a 2-minute rebuttal. Then we have a sort of a special part of the program where each candidate will ask a question, one question, and the same question of the other two, or perhaps just the other one. And each will have an opportunity for a response of 90 seconds. After that, we'll move to your questions, and if Mr. Nader doesn't join us, there'll be extra time for that. And we'll move to your questions, and each of the candidates will have a minute to respond to your questions, and I'll describe that in more detail later. And then finally, at the very end, I'll have a closing question for the candidates. So we have with us Chuck Baldwin of the Constitutional Party. Chuck Baldwin is a founder and minister at the Crossroads Baptist Church in Pensacola, Florida. He's also a talk show host. And next to him, Congressman Bob Barr, Libertarian candidate. He's a 4-term congressman from Georgia. Congressman Barr was part of the Republican Revolution. In 1997, he advocated for the impeachment of President Clinton. And in 2001, he fought hard for civil liberty protections in the Patriot Act. Ralph Nader gets no introduction because he's not here yet. But when he gets here, oh, here he is. Ralph Nader, a man who needs no introduction because he's providing it himself. If you wore a seatbelt on your way here, you may owe that to Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader, welcome. So, it's good to see you, sir. So, as I said, 3 minutes for an opening statement and then a 2-minute rebuttal. And Mr. Nader, you'll be third. Mr. Baldwin, you begin.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much. Thank you to the City Club of Cleveland. It's great to be here, and it's great to see Ralph Nader again and Bob Barr. It's good to participate in this forum. Thank you very much for all of you that have come, some from a short distance, and I understand some have driven a long ways, so thank you all. Let me just begin by saying that I would not be here except for the fact that the Republican Party did not choose to nominate Congressman Ron Paul for their candidate for president. I supported Congressman Paul aggressively and actively. I use my syndicated columns that I write on his behalf. I campaigned for him in Iowa. I campaigned for him in South Carolina. And had he won the Republican nomination for president, I would still be supporting him. I would not be here today. I was thrilled, and unexpectedly so, that here just recently he did endorse me for president this year. I'm honored by that. I didn't expect it. I'm very humbled by it. I'm here because I believe that absent his candidacy, that there was a gap, a vacuum in the public debate for the ideas and the principles that he espoused, namely constitutional government, genuine conservatism. When you look at the two major party candidates, Barack Obama and John McCain, you see virtually no difference between them on many of the salient issues that are very serious to our country's future. For example, illegal immigration. This is a subject that has completely fallen off the radar. Just a few months ago, it was the #1 issue in America. But of course, we know that John McCain was one who attempted to bring amnesty for illegal aliens to our country, a pathway to citizenship. It's true that he will still continue that. If he's president of the United States in 2009, we can expect that he will continue that agenda. Barack Obama, likewise, will continue that agenda. When you look at illegal immigration, amnesty for illegal aliens, etc., that whole gamut, there's virtually no difference between Barack Obama and John McCain. Chuck Baldwin has a commitment to secure our borders. The first thing I would do after I'm president is I would release Ramos and Compion from jail. I would fire U.S. Attorney Johnny Sutton, and I would seek to secure our borders. When you look at the financial bailout, $700 billion plus trillion, whatever it's going to wind up being, first of several installments, again, there's no difference between Barack Obama and John McCain. They were both on the campaign trail supporting the bailout. So tell me again, where's the difference that we see in the two major parties? There is virtually no difference. And so again, that's another reason why that I am in the race, is to present to the American people constitutional government, a commitment to the right to life, a commitment to keep and bear arms, a commitment to the sanctity of marriage, etc., that the traditional conservative principles in constitutional government. That's why Chuck Baldwin is in the race in 2008.
Thank you, sir. Congressman Barr.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you all here at the City Club in Cleveland. Unlike Senator McCain, I was not here at the very first meeting of the club, which was a number of years ago. But this is my second visit to the City Club. I had the honor of being with you all 3 years ago, almost to the day, in August of 2005. I was invited here to discuss the issues involving the USA Patriot Act and the erosion of civil liberties, not just as personified in the Patriot Act, but as a general matter in our society. We discussed at that point, at that time, 3 years ago, many of the constitutional concerns that I'm sure all of us, at least in this room, have, with the tremendous unbridled growth of federal power, executive branch power, and the consequential and necessary dilution and erosion of civil liberties, of our personal liberty, as a result of that tremendous growth in government power. Yeah, I wish I could sit here today, 3 years later, and say that thanks to the wonderful, constitutionally based and sound administration of George W. Bush, we've solved those problems, that the Constitution has been placed once again front and center, that the writ of habeas corpus is being protected, that the government is no longer listening in to the private conversations of American citizens without court order, that the fiscal responsibility that used to be the hallmark of the Republican Party had once again been reasserted and reestablished in Washington, Unfortunately, it ain't so. We've had 3 more years of an administration that believes not one whit in fiscal responsibility. It has given us not only multi-trillion-dollar current year budgets, but a national debt that is well already in excess of $10 trillion, and a current year deficit that is almost $500 billion. And yet what we see in this latest election with the other 2 parties, the Republicans and Democrats, is simply soundbite politics, no leadership whatsoever. I suspect that in the 1 hour that we have here this evening, y'all will hear more about the Constitution than in the 6 hours of presidential and vice presidential so-called debates that we've seen with the other parties. And that's good. America wins when we talk about the Constitution, when we describe and define the differences between America's largest and oldest third party, that is the Libertarian Party that I am honored to represent, and the Republican and Democrat parties, which are simply 2 sides of the same coin of the realm, which is the status quo. It is an honor to be here, an honor to represent the Libertarian Party. I appreciate your interest and look forward to our debate here this evening.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Mr. Nader.
Well, thank you. This may be my 3rd appearance here. I was here, I think, almost 40 years ago. The atmosphere was quite chilled in those days because I was going after the auto companies for not producing safe cars and cars that were fuel efficient and emission controlled. And I guess there were people in the audience who didn't like that. Taking off from Bob Barr's point on the Constitution, I must say things have really gotten bad because when Bob Barr and I are on the same side dealing with civil liberties and the Constitution, I think you voted for the Patriot Act, but you had a sunset provision on it. I don't think you'd vote for it now. But just in terms of comedy and camaraderie, I'm going to put the Constitution here like this. Makes it nice. Okay?
Sure.
This is what we need to safeguard. The flag can take care of itself. This is what we need to safeguard. The big problem in politics always is excessive concentration of power and wealth in too few hands. We've seen that in Wall Street, where the first principle of capitalism was detonated by the bosses of the banks, investment banks, and brokerage houses and insurance companies, namely that shareholders who own their company do not control their company. And under first principle of capitalism is that if you own something, you should have reasonable control of it. It's the lack of control by the mutual funds, pension funds, and other investors of their bosses that allowed their bosses to engage in what the Federal Reserve chief in Dallas, Texas, Richard Fisher, called the other day, quote, a sustained orgy of excess and speculative behavior, end quote. The second principle of capitalism, which is apparently only reserved for small business these days, is that you sink or swim based on your merits. But if you're a big enough corporation, you can say, we're too big to be allowed to fail, AIG, for example, and they go to Washington for a bailout. This not only concentrates more and more power, because you see all the acquisitions of the big fish by the bigger fish. Bank of America acquires a big company, and JP Morgan Chase acquires another failing company, but it concentrates power. And the concentration of power strips the American people in their various roles of deciding anything in public life, unless they're part of the power structure. So we have the taxpayer dollar devastated, misused, and wasted in Washington. We know plenty of that. We have consumers being ripped off by high energy prices, high drug prices, credit card gouges, etc. We have the workers, 47 million of them, 1 out of 3, not making a living wage. They make Wall Street wages, 7, 8, 9, 10, under $11 an hour. So what we need here in politics is parties that break the grip of the two-party system, which is basically indentured to the corporate supremacists who've taken over our government.
Mr. Nader, thank you very much. It's my job to caution you against excessive clapping, because that means that Mr. Nader won't get all the time he deserves or is allotted. Mr. Baldwin, you have now 2 minutes for a rebuttal to anything you've heard, or to use as you wish, really.
Well, I believe with all of my heart that our sovereignty, our national independence are hanging by a very precarious thread. I believe that the forces of globalism are not so slowly evaporating what was a constitutional republic and the greatest on earth. I further believe that the two major parties will do nothing to thwart or to diminish what is currently happening. I think one of the things that we see that is facilitating this, perhaps more than any other, is highlighted recently by the bailout of the Wall Street banksters, as I like to call them, for the fraud that they have perpetrated against the American people. And I do not hesitate to use that word, fraud, because I believe the Federal Reserve is a fraudulent system. And I believe that what we must do is return America to sound money principles, which means we must abolish the Federal Reserve. As President of the United States, I would seek to do just that. I would seek to abolish the Internal Revenue Service. I would seek to overturn the 16th Amendment and bring America back to sound money principles. I think the longer we continue to perpetrate this fraud known as the Federal Reserve and allow these criminals to excessively take advantage of the electorate through this fraud, I think we will reach a point of no return here real soon, and we will go over the cliff toward destruction. I think it's critical that we get our financial house in order. Neither Barack Obama nor John McCain will do this. A Chuck Baldwin administration certainly will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldwin. Congressman Barr.
Thank you again. The current bailout, as we call it, the current bomb, the Bush-Obama-McCain bailout. Actually, it's not one bailout. I think we've already seen about 4 of them and counting. The line of those that have their hand out for more bailout: the automobile industry, the insurance industry, the mass transit industry, the mutual funds. The list is getting longer and longer, already stretches from where I used to hang out when I was in the Congress at one end of Pennsylvania Avenue all the way down to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And this is simply a perfect illustration of what happens when the government gets its hands into our wallet and takes our money and plays favorites with one industry over another, one financial institution over another. They inject tremendous distortions into the marketplace. They prevent the marketplace from operating, which actually, if you all think about it, the market was already starting to self-correct itself. Wells Fargo, a San Francisco-based financial institution that had been, yearning to get into our neck of the woods in the southeastern United States for some time, saw an opportunity in this latest so-called crisis, bought up Wachovia. Didn't ask the government for a dime, didn't ask for any loan guarantees. They saw a business opportunity and made a business decision. Warren Buffett, a man of, I suspect, more means than the 4 of us here put together, saw an opportunity and before the government stopped it, injected, bought up, I think it was about $3 billion in Goldman Sachs. The market was starting to operate. Yet what froze all of that in place? The government froze it in place by saying, oh, we have a better way. We don't want the market to operate. We're going to use taxpayer dollars, borrowed taxpayer dollars, to start monkeying around and distorting the marketplace. Once you open the door to that, there's no end to it. The only change will come by electing Bob Barr's Libertarian candidate to the presidency of the United States. That will change the system.
Thank you, Congressman. Ralph Nader.
In 1938, Franklin Roosevelt sent a message to Congress asking for an independent commission to investigate corporate power abuses. In that message, he said, when government is controlled by private economic power, that is fascism. And so I think that we should start using an adjective before we talk about what government does and doesn't do. Corporate government. It's the corporate state. It's what's bringing together libertarian, conservative, and progressive people around the country against corporate subsidies, for example, against the bloated, wasteful military budget, against criminal wars of aggression abroad, against violation of our civil liberties, against the disrespect of the key trusteeship of the taxpayer dollar that is being wasted. Wasted by what? Wasted by constant demands by corporate interest groups for more and more and more. The American people have rendered 3 verdicts on the state of our country. 9 out of 10 think that America is in decline. No one's ever had it that high before. 3 out of 4 think corporations have too much control over their lives. And 61% in the Gallup poll say both major parties are failing. But both major parties are very clever. They don't like competition. If they were businesses in the marketplace, they would be indicted for violation of the antitrust laws. They keep people like us off the debates, which they control. It's their own little company, the Debate Commission, and they don't want anyone else on the stage. It's the only way to reach tens of millions of people, unless you're a mega billionaire. And poll after poll want more of us on that stage. Every poll wanted Ralph Nader since 2000 on that stage. So we have a serious problem in this country, which is the indicators are all going down. More unemployment, more recession, more poverty, more consumer debt, more corporate debt, more government debt, more waste to the taxpayer's dollar, and more unenforcement of the critical health and safety laws of the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Ralph Nader. Let me remind our listening audience on 90.3 WCPN that you're listening to a live debate at the City Club of Cleveland. The third-party candidates, Ralph Nader, Congressman Bob Barr, and Chuck Baldwin. This is the portion where you, gentlemen, get to ask one another a question. And Congressman Barr, you get the first question. Ralph Nader, you will respond first. You get 90 seconds. You both get 90 seconds to respond. Congressman Barr.
Thank you. One of the areas that I think has been absolutely missing from the manner in which the other 2 parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, have responded to the financial crisis is the Department of Justice has been strangely absent. There's been no prosecutions, not even apparently any significant investigations of what appears to be historic fraud. We in the Libertarian Party believe that this is an appropriate area for the government. I'd like to hear, Chuck, your position as the Constitution Party candidate on the either lack of enforcement or appropriate enforcement of federal laws to right some of these imbalances in the financial crisis. And Mr. Nader, yours too.
Ralph Nader, you get to begin.
That's one of the proposals we have to deal with the corporate crime wave that the Wall Street Journal and Business Week and other publications report on daily. On our website, votenader.org, we have 14 ways to deal with the corporate crime wave. One of them is enough resources in the Justice Department. It's a shocking low number of prosecutors and investigators to do anything. When you hear the FBI is investigating, it's like saying the government's check is in the mail or something. I mean, you know, they don't have the resources to do a job on that. The second thing, we want to shift authority to the shareholders so they control the companies that they own, and they can control the bosses who are supposed to be their employees. Right now, the SEC, over the years, has not given shareholders, they've obstructed shareholders from controlling the company that they own. Thirdly, we can get prison reform as a collateral benefit. Empty the cells of nonviolent drug offenders, which are hundreds of thousands of dollars, get them in shape, prosecute the corporate crooks, throw them in those cells, and you'll have prison reform, because powerful convicts won't stand for these conditions in our prison. And finally, we've got to get a civil right of action. We've got to get people who are ripped off to be able to engage in class actions without harassment and restriction, and to be able to use the courts of law before judge and jury, as our Constitution and 7th Amendment provides. Right in here. More details, votenader.org.
Thank you very much, Ralph Nader. Chuck Baldwin.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Bob. And in fact, I'm on record publicly as already stating this, and as I intimated in my opening remarks here this afternoon, I really do believe that it is fraud that has taken place. I sincerely believe that the Justice Department does have a role to play. I do believe that many of these Wall Street banksters have indeed violated the laws of our land, have committed fraud, and should be prosecuted. In fact, I'm not so sure that I would be averse to bringing back the old-fashioned tar and feathering days. I think that might even be appropriate. Look, the Federal Reserve System is a fraud. 1913 was not a good year for the United States of America. We got the Federal Reserve, we got what became the Internal Revenue Service and the 16th Amendment direct income tax. When we talk about $700 billion, trillion dollars, first of several installments, where's that money coming from? It's printed out of thin air. There is absolutely nothing to back it up. It's very clear that our Constitution calls for, go read the Constitution, it calls for gold and silver to be the financial system of this country. We've abandoned that, and now what's happening with all of this financial meltdown is nothing more than the chickens coming home to roost. And to give the Wall Street bankers $1 trillion to bring restoration back to the system is surely asking the foxes to guard the hen house, if there ever was one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Nader, it is now your turn to pose a question to your opponents.
At the same time or each?
Well, one question for both of them. And
Okay.
Chuck Baldwin will respond first.
We're permitted a foreign policy question?
If it's economics related, I mean, we're supposed to talk
Okay.
about economics. But
Okay, the corporate globalization in this country, ensconced in the World Trade Organization and NAFTA, was passed by Congress on a fast track. There was a limited debate, and no amendments were permitted. This is the greatest surrender of local, state, and national sovereignty in American history. Because one, it gave enforceable authority to other countries to basically challenge our health, safety, labor, environmental, and consumer laws. If you were president, Mr. Baldwin or Mr. Barr, what would you do about WTO and NAFTA, all of which have a 6-month withdrawal option from membership?
Again, I'm on public record on this. I've listened to Barack Obama talk about how that he wants to revamp NAFTA. I've heard John McCain say that he wants to expand NAFTA. Remember, it was both the Democrat Bill Clinton and the Republican Bob Dole that first brought about NAFTA. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to revamp NAFTA, and I do not want to expand NAFTA. I want to eliminate NAFTA. I want to eliminate CAFTA. I want to eliminate GATT and the WTO. I want to get America out of all of that. In fact, while we're at it, I would also propose getting America out of the United Nations. I believe the United Nations is a sinister organization that works against the interests of the United States of America, and I believe it serves no purpose to our good and to our credit. So you're looking at a guy who believes that we also have a problem with the UN. I believe all of this is a part of a greater agenda, which goes back to what I opened with here this afternoon, the globalization of our country, the sacrifice of our sovereignty, the sacrifice of our national independence on the altar of these world markets and world entities. We see the creation starting now with the North American Community or the North American Union. President Bush is talking about some kind of a planetary system responding to this economic situation that we're now in. So again, I see all of that as a part of a bigger picture, the sacrifice of American autonomy and American independence, and I believe that we must protect our independence at all costs.
Chuck Baldwin, thank you very much. Congressman Barr, WTO and NAFTA.
Thank you. Both Senator McCain and Senator Obama and the parties that they represent are absolutely enamored of international organizations, international agreements, whether they are trade or military related. We in the Libertarian Party, and I as the standard bearer for the Libertarian Party, take a much different view. We certainly, as do most businesses and individuals here in Ohio and across the country, believe in the benefits of open and fair trade. But locking ourselves in, as we've done with the WTO, for example, to a very different mechanism than is provided, for example, in our courts of law here in this country with constitutional guarantees and due process, locking ourselves into foreign courts, foreign systems of justice, very different criteria that are very alien to the freedom that we have in this country, I think was a very serious mistake. And I appreciate Ralph bringing up the problems, not just with WTO, but these sort of locked-in trade associations and trade agreements that lock us in for many, many years into the future. With regard to NAFTA, I agree with the other candidates here. We need to, and while I can't put words in their mouth, I believe what we ought to do with NAFTA is to take a much harder look at it than has been done in the past. I have no problem at all with trade agreements, but they have to be fair, they have to be open. The devil, as Ross Perot said, is in the detail. It's not in the agreement to open up trade, it's in the detail of how it locks you in.
Follow up, were you in Congress when NAFTA and WTO were voted on?
No.
Lucky you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Chuck Baldwin, it is your turn to pose a question to your opponents.
Thank you. Ralph and Bob, one of the most underreported stories relative to this financial meltdown is the impact that illegal immigration has had in contributing to this fiasco. For example, many of the subprime loans we now know were granted to illegal aliens, many of whom were, if not all of whom, were fraudulently allowed to take place. We are very clear, as I've already said in this forum, at the Constitution Party, committed to the security of our borders and the stopping of this illegal invasion that's taking place. If you were president, what would you do to secure our borders, and what impact do you believe illegal immigration plays in our overall economic well-being or lack thereof?
Congressman Barr, you get to respond first. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you. The financial crisis that we're facing now, in which the federal government, with both the Democratic and Republican parties in lockstep, are doing everything that they shouldn't be doing to disrupt the market, and the one thing that they should be doing they're not doing, and that is to enforce our laws and regulations to ensure an open, fair, and transparent marketplace. The problems are many that gave rise to this. I'm not really sure that it's that we can blame this one on illegal immigration. I think there's plenty enough blame to go around with regard to AIG and some of these other companies, with regard to government programs such as the Community Reinvestment Act, for example, such as ridiculous policies perpetrated by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And while there might be some tangential aspect of it that one could point to illegal immigration, that's not a major cause of it at all. With regard to illegal immigration, both I and the Libertarian Party believe very strongly that we ought to allow full and fair and lawfully robust immigration into this country. If a person wishes to enter the United States of America for a lawful purpose, they ought to be allowed to do so, be it tourism, working, or school. But they have to enter through a lawful border checkpoint or port of entry. They present valid identification so we can assure ourselves that they do not pose a security risk to this country, and they submit to a communicable disease threat such as tuberculosis so we can assure ourselves, Chuck, that they don't pose a health threat to the citizens of this country.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Ralph Nader, 90 seconds.
Well, the first way we control our borders is to stop our foreign and military policy from supporting dictators and oligarchs in Mexico and Central America that so brutalize their people and impoverish their people in countries controlled by a few wealthy families and the military, that they drive them north. NAFTA has dumped tons and tons of subsidized corn into Mexico. It's dispossessed 1 million peasant farmers, together with their families heading for Guadalajara or Monterrey or heading north, desperate to feed their families. Who wouldn't do that? Crossing the border to feed their families because we support their brutalization? I don't think any of us wouldn't do that. Number two, the large employers who want these workers are the magnet. And they want these workers because these workers can work for dirt cheap wages, and they're frightened and they can be exploited without they're complaining, obviously. This brings down labor standards and working conditions on other low-income workers in this country. If we had a $10 minimum wage, which is exactly what the minimum wage was in 1968, adjusted for inflation, even though workers have doubled their productivity in this country, more Americans would take these jobs. And as long as the unlawful workers are working in this country, and they're having their taxes withheld and Social Security deducted, they have to be given equal rights with American workers. Otherwise, they will push down millions and millions of workers, many of whom are minority workers. There needs to be law enforcement against these employers that take on unlawful entry workers. But we shouldn't be cruel toward them A lot of what they're forced to do is because of our foreign and military policy and the greed of the big chicken processors and meat packers in this country who should be hiring American workers at decent wages.
Thank you very much, Ralph Nader. We're going to move on now to the traditional City Club question and answer portion. And let me remind you, if you're listening on WCPN 90.3 FM, this is a live debate. Third-party candidates, Ralph Nader, Congressman Bob Barr, and Chuck Baldwin. We're very pleased to be able to host them here today. And here's how this part of the debate will work. Questions addressed to a specific candidate will give that candidate 1 minute to respond and the other candidates 30 seconds each. If you would like to pose a question to all three candidates, they'll each get a minute to respond. As moderator, I have the right to follow up on anything, and we'll see if that happens. And to the audience, please make your question brief so we can get as much of a response in as possible, and please don't use this opportunity to make any sort of speech. We really did all come here to hear the candidates. So holding our microphone are City Club new leaders Jonathan Broadbent and Jeff Sobera. And first question for our candidates, please.
Hi, sirs. My name's Sean Ryan. I just finished up a campaign for Congress. I got 241 votes, so if anyone voted for me, thanks. I wrote a letter to each of your campaigns in which I suggested that you consider combining forces. Some people may not know, but the third-party candidates all met together about a month and a half ago and agreed upon 4 points on which they all agree and on which each of the Democratic and Republican parties all disagree. And I think it might be time for us to put our egos aside, certain less important issues aside, and join together. And my suggestion would be if you could find one person behind which you might be able to unite, perhaps the person who called you all together in the first place, we might have a viable opportunity to vote for somebody that we believe in.
I don't mean to cut you off, but if you could get to your question, please.
Well, I was just wondering if you think that's a possibility, if it's possible for you guys to combine your forces. And, I mean, you each have a small constituency, but a devoted constituency. And with these sorts of agreements that you have, you could ask your supporters to unite behind one person.
Thanks very much. Ralph Nader, you're first.
A lot of our positions are supported by a majority of the American people. Take the civil liberties, take the bailouts, for example, take the enormous waste in the military budget and corporate subsidies. I think there's a lot of support for that. But there are a lot of differences. I mean, you haven't provoked the differences. For example, I really believe in strong health and safety regulatory programs. Food and Drug Administration, FAA, railroad safety, OSHA, EPA, auto safety. They've been put to sleep by both Clinton and Bush. They're not saving American lives. I believe also in single-payer health insurance, full Medicare for all, with private delivery of health care in a competitive system and free choice of doctor and hospital for patients. 20,000 Americans die every year, according to the Institute of Medicine, because they can't afford health insurance. Millions get sick, stay sick, or get injured and don't get treatment. That is a brutal, cruel system that does not operate in Western Europe. Nobody dies in Western Europe because they can't afford health insurance. So, and also on things like pro-life, pro-choice, I mean, there are a lot of differences between us, and it's very hard to meld them together. I believe in more candidates. I believe in a multi-party system.
Thank you very much.
I believe in debates.
Clearly. Congressman Barr.
Thank you. Yeah, we're 4 or 5 days out from election. It's completely ridiculous to suggest that all of a sudden, you know, it would be impossible. I mean, you can't do it legally. We're on the ballot. I am the standard bearer for the Libertarian Party, America's oldest and largest third party. We stand for the proposition of maximizing individual liberty and minimizing government power, getting the government out of one's home, one's school, one's workplace, one's wallet, one's personal life. And if my good friend Chuck Baldwin wants to urge his supporters to vote for me, and Ralph Nader does, because we agree on those issues, now is your chance. But our target in this election is to point out to the American people the tremendous damage that is being done to our Constitution, our economy, our family life, our education in this country by the monopoly status quo parties that we have running this country. We need to break that. That's how we will reassert freedom in America.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. I agree with Mr. Nader that there are several differences between us as well as agreements. on some of the what we call social issues. I am adamantly pro-life. I am very much pro-traditional marriage. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I, again, very much believe that we must secure our borders from illegal immigration. There are several issues that I'm sure that we could find difference with. As to third parties uniting, I'm not sure that I would oppose that under the right circumstances and with the right candidate. It's not about me as far as I'm concerned. I'm not here because I'm on an ego trip or because I'm trying to do something for myself. I really believe the message must go out, and I'm trying to bring that message to the American people. If Ron Paul were to head up a third-party rally, I would be the first one to throw my flag in his direction.
Okay. Our next question.
For all candidates, what is your position on the impeachment of George W. Bush?
Position on the impeachment of George W. Bush. Congressman Barr, you led an impeachment charge once.
I have some passing familiarity with the concept. You're absolutely correct. As a matter of fact, it was almost, it would be 11 years ago, 1997 in November, when I filed the very first formal instrument, an inquiry of impeachment. The impeachment of George W. Bush is obviously a moot point. I mean, we're just a few months away from him leaving office. Thank you, Lord. And the Congress is out of session. There's no opportunity for it. It's a moot point at this point. I did testify just a few months ago before the House Judiciary Committee on issues that Dennis Kucinich here in Ohio and a number of others, including myself, had raised with regard to abuses of executive branch power by this administration, such things as signing statements, the illegal wiretapping of American citizens, and so forth. And these are very important issues. But Congress should have looked into months and months ago to determine whether or not there was sufficient evidence to determine exactly what this administration had done so that the gentleman's question could be answered. At this point, Congress has let too much time slip by, and it's a moot point.
Mr. Baldwin.
Dan, thank you for the question. Bob is right. It is a moot issue at this point. I think the question, though, illustrates the problem of the lack of accountability by the two major parties that control our political system. The Founding Fathers' idea in creating an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch was for the purpose of providing checks and balances each to the other, so that you would not have a rogue judiciary, for example, or a rogue executive branch, so that the other branches could bring balance and justice into the federal government. The problem is we haven't had that accountability because the two major parties would more rather take care of their own parties than take care of what's right for America. George Washington was exactly right in his farewell address when he warned us that an over-infatuation with political partisanship would lead ultimately to the demise of our country because the interest of party would take precedent over the interest of America. And that's exactly what we have with these two major parties, and that's where I concur with Ralph and Bob, that we must come to a point in this country where that we break up this duopoly of the two-party system.
Chuck Baldwin, thank you very much. Ralph Nader.
Unanimity, it looks like. The criminal recidivist regime of Bush and Cheney is the most impeachable regime in American history. The American Bar Association, full of conservative Republican lawyers, sent 3 papers, 3 reports to George W. Bush in 2005, 2006, charging him with serious violations of the U.S. Constitution. In 5 areas, they're impeachable. Criminal war of aggression that was undeclared in Iraq. Number 2, systemic torture. Number 3, what Bob Barr just mentioned, snooping on Americans without judicial warrant. That's a 5-year jail term. That's a first-class penalty. Number 4, incarcerating Americans without filing charges, denying them habeas corpus. Number 5, the signing statements by Bush. He set a record where he says, I'll sign this bill by Congress, but I, King George IV, will decide whether to obey it or not. After they leave office, they are still subject, Bush and Cheney, to the criminal laws. They can still be prosecuted, just as Nixon was about to be prosecuted for a one-time burglary obstruction of justice by the Watergate Task Force report. We recommend DAs all over the country to rustle up their statute books and convene grand juries.
So to be clear, Mr. Nader, you would say let's go forward with an impeachment, but Congressman Barr and Chuck Baldwin, it's a moot point. Pretty much?
No, I don't think that. I think he's saying that the criminal process, once Bush leaves office, should handle it.
Oh.
That it's not tied down to simply the term of the Congress, I think.
Yeah, they're
Very
not
well.
immune to the criminal laws. People
Very
often
well.
think they are. They're not.
Our next question.
Since the Social Security and Medicare programs were both established to protect and benefit American citizens, should I as a citizen have the right to opt out of those programs if I think it's in my best interest, or is the federal government better equipped to decide that for me? And if the latter, would I be best off yet if they had access to my entire paycheck and decided for me how all my money should be spent and hopefully gave me like a weekly allowance?
Chuck Baldwin, you get this is for all three of you. Chuck Baldwin, you first.
Well put, and I could not agree more. That's one of our major planks. Obviously, you cannot go to senior citizens in our country, people that have put into Social Security all their lives, and tell them, oh, we're sorry, that institution no longer exists. That not only would be wrong, it would be immoral in my view. But for younger Americans such as yourself, those who have their careers and their futures ahead of them, I think it's absolutely essential that we give them the freedom and the opportunity to opt out of those government systems, to be able to privately finance their own retirements. And I think most of us recognize that to do so would be far better in the end than what we currently have, not to mention the fact that we are breaking the bank and the money is not even there. How we can afford it is anyone's guess. So our response, the Constitution Party, and my response personally is I think absolutely yes. I believe you should have the right as a young American, as a young adult, you would have the right. If I'm President of the United States, I would do everything that I could to give you the liberty and the right to opt out of that system if you so desired and to pursue a private interest for your own benefit.
Thanks very much, Chuck Baldwin. Congressman Barr.
Both Senator McCain and Senator Obama, representing respectively the Republican and the Democratic parties, are both deathly afraid of touching the third rail of American politics. And that's why, for example, with the current administration, even though President Bush talked a good game, a big game about tackling the entitlement programs that are going to swamp the economy of this country, you think the $10 trillion current debt is bad. Look at the $100 trillion unfunded liability that is out there for these other entitlement programs, including Social Security. Bush talked about it, didn't do anything about it. It didn't even come up in any meaningful way at all in the recent debates. I'm glad that it's come up here because it does illustrate an immoral program whereby the government takes, by threat of force, money from individuals and doesn't even provide them an ownership interest in the program itself. I mean, what could be more immoral than that? We have put forward in our campaign a very comprehensive program for personal, individual investment accounts. That is the way we need to be moving, and it is particularly important for young people, such as the gentleman who asked the question, to push for that.
Congressman, thank you. Ralph Nader.
Disagree. What would Americans elderly be doing now in this collapsing retirement system, looted and drained by these Wall Street crooks, if they didn't have that Social Security check? What would happen if they put that Social Security money, as Republicans and some crypto Democrats wanted to do, into the stock market a few years ago? We have to develop a sense of community in this country. I don't believe people in this country spend every waking hour running around with 2 jobs, Walmart wages, picking up children at $500 a month daycare, congested traffic, having to take care of an ailing parent. What kind of life is that? In Western Europe, they have democracies, and right out of the rubble of World War II, they decided to get universal health care, decent wages, decent pensions, 4 weeks paid vacation for all the people, decent public transit, daycare, paid maternity leave, paid family sick leave, and university-free tuition. And we're the richest country in the world, and we got 100 million people in this country who are in dire poverty, even though they work their heads off for their kids. So I disagree. Social Security is solid until 2043, and Medicare is the problem, being blown apart by the greed of the health insurance companies, the hospital chains, and the drug companies, many of which are subsidized by our tax dollars.
Thank you very much, Ralph Nader. We have another question?
Yes, something that's kind of important. It's estimated that the war in Iraq costs $10 billion a month. I believe that estimate to be conservative. What would you gentlemen do about the war in Iraq? And secondly, what would you do to recoup a lot of this money that has been wasted over the years? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ralph Nader, I believe you're first.
Well, in 2004, I urged a 6-month negotiated withdrawal of all U.S. soldiers and corporate contractors from Iraq with UN-sponsored elections, a certain amount of autonomy between Sunni, Shiite, and Kurds, which they worked out, by the way, in the 1950s, before the dictators took over, and continued humanitarian aid because of what we've done to the devastated people of Iraq. I think that'll knock the bottom out of the insurgency. It will end the $14 million an hour we're spending, 24 hours a day. Bring that money back home, put it into public works, look at Cleveland, repair the schools, clinics, public transit, the drinking water systems, all the things that will put a better livelihood for people, good jobs on the ground that can't be exported to China.
Thank you very much, sir. Congressman Barr.
Here again, the differences between the Libertarian Party platform and my position as its standard bearer and the Republicans and Democrats could not be clearer. Senator McCain apparently believes that we ought to stay in Iraq, regardless of whether the surge is working or not working or whatever, into the foreseeable or even unforeseeable future. Senator Obama, it's unclear. He talks a great game. He talked a great game early on about removing the troops from Iraq, and he was right about that. We do need to remove the troops, remove the economic and military security blankets that are artificially propping up the government over there. But Senator Obama now seems to be saying, well, we'll move them out of one theater of operations and ship them to another. So what we're going to be doing is propping up, using those troops to prop up another regime. That is the regime in Afghanistan. What we have to do is realize that the way we defeat the terrorists is smart and focused. That is, you have good intelligence, you find where they are, you go after them, you take them out. You don't use precious American lives and $400 million a day of U.S. taxpayer dollars occupying a foreign land in order to do it. That's not good policy, and it's completely unnecessary.
Congressman Barr, thank you. Chuck Baldwin.
Right. From the beginning, I have made my position clear on this. The Constitution Party also is very clear on our position. We believe that we must, as soon as we can safely and securely do so, extract our troops and our civilian personnel from Iraq and Afghanistan. First of all, as President of the United States, I would never send troops to invade and occupy a foreign country without a declaration of war from Congress first. It is clearly unconstitutional to invade and occupy a foreign country absent a declaration of war from Congress. I would follow the example of Thomas Jefferson, who, when he was dealing with the Barbary pirates, asked Congress for letters of marque and reprisal. If we had done that in 2001, I personally believe that Osama bin Laden would have either been captured or killed, the Al-Qaeda network would have been destroyed, and we would not have lost 4,000 of our finest and best in Iraq. And that's what I would do as President of the United States. The longer we stay in Iraq, I believe the more vulnerable we are. It's a very dangerous situation internationally with China down in Panama, Russia saber-rattling. We cannot leave our troops in Iraq.
It's time now for the final question. You'll each have 2 minutes to respond. Ralph Nader, you'll be first. Chuck Baldwin, you'll be second. And Congressman Barr, you'll have the last word. The current economic crisis has demonstrated that we live in a global economy. We've talked about NAFTA, we've talked about WTO. We haven't mentioned the fact that there's a 7% unemployment rate in Ohio right now, much higher here in Northeast Ohio, in double digits in Northeast Ohio. What role should the U.S. play in the global economy, and how can that role create more jobs here in Northeast Ohio and in other areas of the country? Ralph Nader.
First, I believe in community self-reliance economically to the most practical extent. That is, to the extent that we can grow our food, closer to where we eat it, rather than importing it from China, which is increasingly contaminating exports to the U.S., like fish and other products, the better off we are. The extent we can produce our own energy through wind power and through water power and solar energy and energy efficiency, a barrel of oil you don't waste is one you don't have to import, the better off we are. To the extent we have community health clinics and cooperatives, and we not only deal with treatment and diagnosis, but exercise and good nutrition, the better off we are. Globalization stretches the line of supplies all over the world, which makes us excessively dependent. You know, something happens in Hong Kong, it affects us. Something happened here, it affects London. Something that happens in the Middle East affects us. That is an unhealthy form of dependency, and it's only going to get greater. And the more we depend on corporate globalization and longer lines of supply, etc., the less self-reliant we're going to be, and the more dependent we'll be on global corporations that have no allegiance to our country anymore, other than to control it or ship its jobs and industries to fascist and communist regimes like China, who know how to keep workers in their place, don't they? I think the key thing here is we've got to have a national debate, which we didn't have this year, on economic policy, on where we put our tax dollars, on where we put our savings, on where we put the protections for our workers, consumers, and taxpayers. That is essential because democracy is of, by, and for the people for a good reason. And that reason is that when people decide the future of their lives through representative, accountable government and through their own personal choices, we're going to have a better country all around for our children and grandchildren to inherit, but not to have corporate supremacists subordinate the sovereignty of the people.
Ralph Nader, thank you very much. Chuck Baldwin.
Thank you, Dan. I grew up not too far from here in northern Indiana, and from 1971 to 1973, I worked at the General Motors Truck and Coach assembly line plant just outside Detroit, Michigan, Plant 5 to be exact. When I was there, the economy was robust, unemployment was virtually unknown. It was a wonderful place to work and live. I went back to that same neighborhood just a few weeks ago on the campaign trail. The plant I used to work at no longer exists. It's been torn down. Most of the plants in that area have been torn down. The jobs are now in Mexico, China, and India. People are working 2 and 3 jobs just trying to make a living. Unemployment is unreasonable. And the reason for this is because back in the 1990s, President Bill Clinton and then Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole conspired together to bring NAFTA into existence. Since then, we've got CAFTA, we've got the WTO, we've got GATT, we've got FTAA on the horizon, and we've talked about some of these things already. It is absolutely essential that we bring our work home to America. What I would like to do is, after we have expunged the IRS and the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve, and we've slashed federal spending, I would like to get rid of the Department of Education, for example, and all those departments that Newt Gingrich promised to get rid of back in 1994 when Bob came to Congress, and then they didn't do it. I would like to eliminate those same federal departments, slash spending, and then I would like to implement an across-the-board general 10% tariff on all imports coming into the United States that make up the difference. What this would do, it would bring our jobs back home. It would bring our manufacturing back home. It would put Ohioans back to work. It would put Hoosiers back to work and Michiganders back to work. It would bring prosperity back to our country again, and we would once again lead the world in prosperity and productivity. All we need is an administration that will put America first, and that's what Chuck Baldwin will do.
Thank you very much, sir. Congressman Barr.
Thank you. If that question had been posed, which unfortunately it wasn't in one of the other debates, to Senator McCain and Senator Obama or Senator Biden and Governor Palin, the response would have been a laundry list of ways the federal government, through the heavy hand of either federal money or federal regulation, could bring jobs to a particular area. The bailout is a perfect example. As a matter of fact, what the federal government needs to be doing is getting out of the way. They need to start reducing some of the ridiculous regulations, such as the CAFE standards.
Corporations that have no allegiance to our country anymore, other than to control it or ship its jobs and industries to fascist and communist regimes like China, who know how to keep workers in their place, don't they? I think the key thing here is we've got to have a national debate, which we didn't have this year, on economic policy, on where we put our tax dollars, on where we put our savings, on where we put the protections for our workers, consumers, and taxpayers. That is essential because democracy is of, by, and for the people for a good reason. And that reason is that when people decide the future of their lives through representative, accountable government and through their own personal choices, we're going to have a better country all around for our children and grandchildren to inherit, but not to have corporate supremacists subordinate the sovereignty of the people.
Ralph Nader, thank you very much. Chuck Baldwin.
Thank you, Dan. I grew up not too far from here in northern Indiana, and from 1971 to 1973, I worked at the General Motors Truck and Coach assembly line plant just outside Detroit, Michigan, Plant 5 to be exact. When I was there, the economy was robust, unemployment was virtually unknown. It was a wonderful place to work and live. I went back to that same neighborhood just a few weeks ago on the campaign trail. The plant I used to work at no longer exists. It's been torn down. Most of the plants in that area have been torn down. The jobs are now in Mexico, China, and India. People are working 2 and 3 jobs just trying to make a living. Unemployment is unreasonable. And the reason for this is because back in the 1990s, President Bill Clinton and then Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole conspired together to bring NAFTA into existence. Since then, we've got CAFTA, we've got the WTO, we've got GATT, we've got FTAA on the horizon, and we've talked about some of these things already. It is absolutely essential that we bring our work home to America. What I would like to do is, after we have expunged the IRS and the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve, and we've slashed federal spending, I would like to get rid of the Department of Education, for example, and all those departments that Newt Gingrich promised to get rid of back in 1994 when Bob came to Congress, and then they didn't do it. I would like to eliminate those same federal departments, slash spending, and then I would like to implement an across-the-board general 10% tariff on all imports coming into the United States that make up the difference. What this would do, it would bring our jobs back home. It would bring our manufacturing back home. It would put Ohioans back to work. It would put Hoosiers back to work and Michiganders back to work. It would bring prosperity back to our country again, and we would once again lead the world in prosperity and productivity. All we need is an administration that will put America first, and that's what Chuck Baldwin will do.
Thank you very much, sir. Congressman Barr.
Thank you. If that question had been posed, which unfortunately it wasn't in one of the other debates, to Senator McCain and Senator Obama or Senator Biden and Governor Palin, the response would have been a laundry list of ways the federal government, through the heavy hand of either federal money or federal regulation, could bring jobs to a particular area. The bailout is a perfect example. As a matter of fact, what the federal government needs to be doing is getting out of the way. They need to start reducing some of the ridiculous regulations, such as the CAFE standards, that are dramatically harming our automobile industry and aren't helping pollution. They're not helping gas mileage and reducing our dependence on foreign oil at all. That's an example of a regulation that has actually become counterproductive. Yes, our companies and our people do operate in a global economy, but my concern as president, first and foremost, is the economy in the United States of America, to begin freeing it up. And in so doing, we will indirectly make America more competitive in the global marketplace by loosening the shackles that are tying American companies down, costing them tremendous amounts of money, lost wages, lost employees, lost inventory, and lost markets overseas. We need to be making America more competitive once again by reducing what government has done in the past. That is what is holding us back, and we need to get a handle on federal spending. When you have nearly $500 billion that our government has to pay every year just for the interest on the national debt, that is money taken out of the productive economy. We need to get that money back into the productive economy by reducing government spending.
Congressman Barr, thank you. Ralph Nader, thank you. Chuck Baldwin, thank you. This has been a fascinating debate. I think more for the similarities that you gentlemen and in positions that you gentlemen share than for the differences, some of which were expected. But I thank you for a vigorous debate, and I thank the City Club as well for hosting this debate. Now turn it over to City Club's Ralph De La Rada.
Thank you very much, Dan. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to a debate between Congressman Bob Barr, Chuck Baldwin, and Ralph Nader, candidates for President of the United States. Thank you, candidates. Thank you, Dan Moulthrop in 90.3, and thank you, audience. This forum is now adjourned.